The crisp white tissue paper crinkled like brittle autumn leaves as I reached into the bin, a chill seeping into my fingertips long before they actually touched anything cold. It was a small box, barely bigger than my palm, wrapped in the same elegant paper that had adorned the gifts for her recent birthday. My breath hitched. This wasn't just any trash. This was the overflowing receptacle by the back door, waiting for its turn with the garbage truck. I'd been searching for a misplaced grocery list, a mundane quest for milk and bread, rummaging through the discarded flyers and crumpled paper bags that had accumulated throughout the week, when my eyes landed on it. A sliver of that familiar, expensive wrapping peeked out from beneath a stained pizza box, the kind with a greasy imprint that always left a faint aroma. My stomach did a sickening flip, a visceral reaction to the incongruity of it all. It was too small, too deliberately tucked away, to be an accidental discard, a casual oversight. I pulled it out, my hands trembling slightly, a tremor I tried to suppress, to ignore. Inside, nestled amongst crumpled tissue, was a delicate silver locket. Not just any locket. It was identical to the one my grandmother had worn for decades, the one she'd promised to me, her eldest granddaughter, with a whispered blessing and a gentle squeeze of my hand. The one my mother had suddenly lost 2 years ago. A vague explanation offered during a hurried phone call, a conversation that had ended as abruptly as it began, leaving me with a lingering sense of unease. And now, here it was, unceremoniously tossed aside like last week's leftovers, an object of sentimental value relegated to the refuse. That's when the calls started. My phone, vibrating furiously on the kitchen counter, felt like an accusation, its insistent buzz a jarring disruption to the quiet that had settled over me. My mother's name flashed across the screen, a familiar, yet increasingly unwelcome sight. I stared at it, the locket suddenly feeling heavy in my hand, its cool metal a stark contrast to the warmth I had once associated with such heirlooms. For years, I'd navigated a complex emotional landscape within our family, a silent observer in my mother's elaborate performances. She was a master of curated appearances, of painting a picture of effortless grace and generosity for the outside world, a facade that was, to me, as transparent as a freshly cleaned window. Behind closed doors, the cracks in the facade were, to my discerning eyes, glaringly obvious. Small slights, pointed comments delivered with a saccharine smile, a constant undercurrent of passive aggression that had become as familiar as the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall. It had all built up over time, a slow erosion of any genuine warmth, a gradual wearing away of the foundation of our relationship. This locket, it was more than just an object, more than a piece of tarnished silver. It represented a tangible piece of my inheritance, a sentimental heirloom passed down through generations, a symbol of my grandmother's enduring love that my mother had conveniently kept from me, or at least from my possession. I'd asked about it multiple times over the past 2 years, each inquiry met with vague excuses, a sigh that seemed to carry the weight of the world, a promise to look again, a promise that was always followed by silence. And all the while it was here in the trash, a secret buried beneath discarded remnants of everyday life. The phone rang again, its insistent chime a summons I couldn't ignore, not without raising further suspicion. My mother's voice, laced with an exaggerated sweetness that always set my teeth on edge, chirped, "Darling, just calling to see how you are. Are you sure you don't want me to come over and help you with anything? You sound a little stressed." The feigned concern in her tone was almost palpable, a stark contrast to the reality of what I held in my hand, a wave of something cold and sharp coursing through me. I took a deep breath, the scent of stale garbage momentarily grounding me, a brief anchor in the rising tide of my emotions. "I'm fine, Mom," I said, my voice surprisingly steady, a testament to the years of practice in maintaining a calm exterior. "Just tidying up. Found something interesting." A beat of silence. Then a subtle shift in her tone, a slight tightening of the vocal cords, a subtle betrayer of her inner turmoil. "Oh, what did you find, dear?" she asked, the sweetness now tinged with a nascent curiosity, an almost imperceptible tremor of apprehension. "Just a small silver locket," I said, my gaze fixed on the delicate chain, its intricate links glinting faintly in the dim kitchen light. "Thought it looked familiar." Another pause, longer this time, thick with unspoken thoughts and strategic calculations. The sweetness evaporated entirely, replaced by a brittle tension that crackled over the phone line. "A locket? Where did you find this locket?" Her voice was sharper now, the practiced warmth replaced by a guarded, almost accusatory tone. "In the bin, actually," I replied, the words tasting like ash on my tongue, a bitter confirmation of my suspicions. Right by the back door. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating, an invisible weight pressing down on me. I could almost hear the gears grinding in her head, the frantic scramble to construct a plausible lie, or perhaps, to gauge the extent of my discovery, to assess the damage. "Oh," she finally managed, her voice a little too high, a little too breathless, an obvious attempt at feigned nonchalance. "That's peculiar. Must have fallen out of something. A gift, perhaps? I'm always so busy, you know. Things get misplaced." Her attempts at damage control were pathetic, transparently so. The flurry of calls that followed over the next hour were a masterclass in manufactured panic, a performance designed to subtly shift the blame, to paint me as the overly emotional one. She called my sister, my aunt, even my father, painting a picture of me as being overly sensitive, perhaps even unstable, having a meltdown over something trivial. She implied I was being dramatic, that I was making a mountain out of a molehill, that my reaction was disproportionate to the situation. The tone was always one of bewildered concern, as if I were the problem, the irrational one, for being upset about finding a cherished heirloom in the trash, a piece of my own history discarded like yesterday's news. Her calls were a desperate attempt to control the narrative, to preempt any possibility of me speaking the truth to anyone else, to preemptively discredit any accusation I might make. Each frantic plea for reassurance, each carefully worded dismissal of my discovery, only served to solidify my resolve. It wasn't about revenge. It was about a quiet reclaiming of my own truth, a necessary act of self-preservation in the face of a prolonged campaign of emotional manipulation. The following weekend, my mother hosted her usual Sunday brunch for the extended family. It was a meticulously orchestrated affair, a stage where she could bask in the glow of adoration and faux admiration, a ritual that always left me feeling drained and hollow. I'd been dreading it, as always, the forced smiles and superficial conversations, but this time, I felt a strange sense of calm resolve, a quiet strength that had been building within me for days. I arrived, not with a gift, but with a small unassuming box tucked away in my purse, its contents carefully wrapped in tissue. As we gathered in the living room, the usual effusive greetings and polite inquiries about my well-being were exchanged, the familiar dance of familial pleasantries. Then, as conversation lulled, a brief interlude before the inevitable shift to the day's main event, my mother, ever the gracious hostess, gestured towards the coffee table, a focal point for the unfolding drama. "Oh, I have a little something I wanted to share," she announced, her voice resonating with practiced warmth, her eyes sweeping across the assembled faces, pausing for a moment on mine with a carefully manufactured sincerity. "A small token of appreciation for all of you who make life so wonderful." She then proceeded to pull out a box, similar in size to the one I'd found in the bin, and began to unwrap it with a flourish. Inside were several small, identical silver lockets, their polished surfaces gleaming under the afternoon sun filtering through the bay window. The gasps of delight from my aunts and cousins filled the air, a chorus of manufactured surprise and genuine pleasure. "Aren't they lovely?" my mother beamed, her eyes scanning the room, landing on me with a triumphant glint, a subtle challenge in her gaze. A little reminder of family love. "I thought they'd be perfect for everyone." My sister, oblivious to the subtext, immediately clasped hers around her neck, the silver chain resting against her pale skin. My aunts cooed, admiring the craftsmanship, their fingers tracing the delicate engravings. And then my mother's gaze fixed on me again, a pointed invitation in her look. "Darling," she said, her voice a touch too loud, too insistent, as if to ensure everyone heard her magnanimous gesture. "I saved one for you, of course. A special one." She held out a locket identical to the others, its surface reflecting the room in miniature, but not the locket, the one that held the weight of years and unspoken truths. This was my moment. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't demand attention or seek to orchestrate a scene. I simply reached into my pocket, my fingers closing around the small box I'd brought, its familiar weight a comforting presence. "Thank you, Mom," I said, my voice calm and clear, cutting through the murmur of polite appreciation like a shard of glass. "But I already have one." I opened the box and placed the locket on the coffee table, directly between my mother and her admiring audience, its placement deliberate, its presence undeniable. The familiar gleam of the silver, the intricate engraving on its surface, seemed to absorb all the light in the room, drawing every eye, every gaze. It was a small object, yet its impact was profound. A hush fell over the room, A sudden, startling silence that felt louder than any noise. Faces turned, first to the locket on the table, then to me, their expressions a mixture of confusion and dawning realization. My mother's practiced smile faltered, her eyes widening almost imperceptibly. My sister's hand, which had been idly playing with her new necklace, stilled. My aunt leaned in, her brow furrowed in confusion, her gaze shifting from the locket to my face, a silent question in her eyes. "This one," I continued, my voice unwavering, each word carefully chosen, each syllable imbued with the quiet certainty that had finally settled within me, was a gift from Grandma. She promised it to me. I found it in the trash a few days ago. The air in the room crackled, charged with an unspoken tension, a palpable shift in the atmosphere. My mother's face, moments before radiating warmth and generosity, contorted into a mask of disbelief and dawning horror. Her eyes darted between the locket on the table, a silent accuser, and my face, searching for an explanation, a denial, anything to salvage her carefully constructed image, her meticulously crafted reputation. My sister was the first to speak, her voice a bewildered whisper that carried across the unnerving silence. "Mom, is that Grandma's locket? The one you said you lost?" The innocence of her question was a powerful counterpoint to the underlying accusation. The carefully orchestrated facade shattered, splintering into 1,000 irreparable pieces. My mother sputtered, attempting a deflection, a vague excuse about a cleaning mishap, a moment of forgetfulness brought on by the stress of her busy life. But the words lacked conviction, their delivery faltering, their logic crumbling under the weight of the evidence. The faces around me shifted, the admiration replaced by a subtle, knowing appraisal. The questions that followed were not accusatory, not overtly judgmental, but probing, their quiet curiosity a far more potent form of judgment than any raised voice could ever be. They asked about Grandma, about the locket, about its history, their questions weaving a subtle web of scrutiny around my mother. My mother spent the rest of the afternoon in a state of flustered agitation, her usual composure deserting her. Her pronouncements were interrupted by awkward silences, her attempts at conversation faltering. Her practiced charm seemed to have deserted her, leaving behind a nervous energy that was palpable to everyone in the room. The focus of the gathering, subtly but undeniably, shifted. The locket on the coffee table, unacknowledged and unclaimed by my mother, became a silent testament to her actions, a small shining monument to her selective memory and her willingness to discard what she no longer deemed valuable, or perhaps, what she simply wanted to keep for herself, a secret possession hidden from view. The conversations around me, which had once revolved around my mother's generosity and graciousness, now had an undercurrent of quiet observation, of unspoken reassessment. By the time I left, the phone calls had stopped. There were no frantic explanations, no demands for reconciliation, no further attempts to control the narrative. Just a heavy, uncomfortable quiet, a silence that spoke volumes. The air in the car on the way home was thick with the unspoken, the aftermath of a truth finally brought into the light. Sometimes the most profound justice isn't about grand pronouncements or public shaming. It's about the quiet surfacing of truth, a small act of defiance that exposes the rot beneath the polished surface, and the resulting indelible shift in the way people see you, and more importantly, how they see the person who tried to hide it all. The locket remained on the table, a silent witness to the unraveling of a carefully constructed illusion, a small gleaming symbol of a truth that could no longer be contained. It sat there, unmoving, unflinching, its silent presence a constant reminder of what had transpired, and what would never be the same. The shift in perception was subtle, a quiet recalibration of relationships, a slow erosion of unquestioning admiration. It was the quiet justice of exposure, the power of a simple truth revealed in the most ordinary of settings.